Just to ensure, this is the Stand With Youth Reimagine Racial Inequalities event. We're really excited to see over 250 people joining this event today, and we're really excited about the conversation we're going to have with some great panelists. Just firstly, to introduce UK Youth and a bit about what we do for anyone who might not have heard about us before. So UK Youth is a national charity supporting 9 to 25-year-olds to thrive and at every stage in their lives. So UK Youth empowers and supports these young people through our UK Youth movement, which is made up of 5,500 organisations across the UK, and they support about 1.6 million young people. UK Youth has been hosting the Reimagine series for 5 weeks now, and we've been exploring and reimagining what the future looks like for young people post-COVID-19. This event is co-hosted by the Diana Award, and we're really happy to have Tessie, who's the CEO, on our panel today. And this event will be focusing on exploring young Black voices, and this is linked to our Young and Black campaign that we've just launched. Just some logistics on the event: we will be recording today, and the recording will be up on UK Youth's website in the next week. To get involved in the event, please use the Q&A function to ask any questions, and throughout we will take some time to answer any of the questions in the Q&A, as much questions as we can possibly get through, but obviously there might be a few. If you want to get involved, please use the hashtag #StandWithYouth on the social platforms and hashtag Young and Black. We will be having a young artist who will be illustrating the event today, so look out for those images on our social media platforms. And that's all from me logistically. I will now hand over to Meg, who is our chair and will be hosting the event.
Hi everyone, my name is Meg Zinat-Wimithi. I'm an award-winning mental health campaigner and consultant, and one of the recipients of the Diana Award, and I'm going to be your host today for this wonderful conversation. So in the Reimagine series, this is our 6th episode, and today we're going to be talking about all things to do with race and all things to do with being a woman of colour as well. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on Tessie and Ndidi to talk a bit more about what it means to be young and Black and why they started this campaign. Over to you guys.
Hi Meg, I'm so excited that you described me as young and Black. That's amazing. I'm going to take that young and run with it. Hello everybody, we are, as everyone said, really excited to have so many of you here. I think Tessie and I are here to talk about the Young and Black campaign that was started, and for us, I think the impetus of this was lots of conversations that happened as a result of the George Floyd video that went viral. And I know Tessie and I kind of immediately started communicating, saying, sharing our devastation, sharing our pain, but then really quickly sharing the weight of accountability we felt to do something in this moment, and really to channel what we were hearing from young people around the need to express themselves. I had a very similar conversation with an amazing young man called Jermaine Jackman, who had the same sort of weight and really kind of spurred the idea of launching a campaign around capturing the stories of Black people talking about what it means to either be young and Black or growing up young and Black, what they remember. And so the campaign's launched, it's a couple of weeks in now, and I know from my experience the stories have been so powerful. We didn't put any anchor in terms of the type of questions we want, responses we wanted. People have just spoken from their hearts, and I would definitely encourage people to check that out. Tessie,
No, absolutely. Thanks so much, Ndidi. And I think, and Meg, and I think you really describe it. One of the things that we are passionate about at the Diana Award is driving change for young people. And we do that across the country, tackling some of the multiple disadvantages that young people face. And I suppose when the case of George Floyd kind of came out, and it's incredible that it happened in the pandemic, because we know that these things happen all the time, but it's not always captured on camera. And so there was something different about this case. And it felt like, I think for me, it felt like, yes, I know this. It's conversations that most Black households have all the time. Yet there was a moment or a movement where I think we got together and we thought, how can we create change? What can we do to actually bring change? It feels like we've been on this journey forever. Our parents' parents fought the same battle. And yet here we are in 2020 talking about something that you hoped that we wouldn't have to deal with. And I think I'm so proud that we are here where we are now. And I think for us, this is all about how can we create change? What can we do differently? This is very much about capturing people's story, but with the ultimate plan of creating a new world. We want this to stop now. We want, when our children get into the workplace or going to schools, that the narrative is completely different for them. So I'm really excited about this series and this campaign. And yeah, sky's the limit, or actually there's no limit. We want change.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ndidi and Tessie. I think that's a fantastic roundup. And just to set a few ground rules for today's conversation, this is absolutely going to be a safe space. Some of the topics that we are going to be talking about may be quite sensitive. And if they are, please feel free to leave at any point that you find the conversation uncomfortable. And please do flag that up with all of us as a team. We'll be able to give you some resources that you can use after this session. But most importantly, we want to hear from you as well. There's a Q&A function. Whatever questions that you have throughout the discussion, please use the Q&A and we'll try our best to answer them. But without further ado, this conversation is very much going to be uncovering some of the truths about racial discrimination and racial inequalities, but most importantly, asking us all to look to the future about what can be done for young people and what the future of being a Black young person in the UK and around the world can look like, and how we can all kind of contribute to that message. What I want to do right now is introduce our wonderful panel. So I'm going to ask these incredible ladies to just go around doing a quick introduction. And I want to start with you, Sabrina. Can you just introduce yourself to us?
Hi everyone, my name's Sabrina Jones and I'm a founder of a social enterprise called SayItWithChess. So SayItWithChess works with those in secondary schools who are at the highest risk of getting excluded. I'm also on UK Youth's Advisory Board.
Amazing. Fadima, could you introduce yourself for me, please?
Hi, my name is Fadima. I'm the social media editor for Telegraph Women's Sports, so covering anything around women's sports. I used to previously work for a charity called 8 Stars, who are a big part of UK Youth and who's kind of been like my journey into youth work and also helped me transition into this world of like sports media.
Aretha, please could you introduce yourself for me?
Hi guys, my name's Councillor Ursula Pond. I am the founder of the ESP Foundation, which works with young people through education, sports and politics. In a younger youth life, I also played football at quite a high elite level for the likes of Arsenal, Chelsea and Tottenham.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. And as you've heard from Ndidi and Tessie already, the first question I kind of want to ask you all is, what was your experience and what is your experience of being a young Black person in the UK, and how has that shaped some of your insights and thoughts on a daily basis in your life?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Brilliant. I think for me, I've always been aware and been told that it's going to be a harder journey. So I've never actually allowed that negativity to take up any space. And I've always looked at it as that's what other people think of me, and how am I going to use that as almost a platform to be better. And that goes with anything, whether that's sports or education or anything I kind of put my hands to. But I am quite aware that when I go into certain circles and certain rooms, there is not a lot of people who look like me or who have had similar experiences to myself. So I kind of use that to engage young people, to say this is what's out there, and try and provide signposting opportunities for them to come into those rooms and experience those different things that maybe they won't get from their normal communities. So I always kind of see it as a challenge, but a good challenge in order to almost give access and opportunity to young people. So yeah, using it more of a glass full than a glass empty opportunity.
I think for me, like obviously everyone has different struggles throughout life, but from a very young age, I was very aware that the colour of my skin was going to be something which was going to make life harder for me. So that would mean in terms of school, in terms of what kind of grades I'll be predicted, also the likelihood of me getting a 2-1 or first when I went to university. So I've been very much aware of it, and I say personally I've found it very tiring because it's something which I'm consciously aware of. If I go for a job interview, my name's Sabrina, so they may not necessarily assume that I'm going to be Black, and when they meet me, I'm aware that sometimes people are shocked at, for instance, some of the things which I've achieved. So I think for me, I'd say it's quite tiring. And in terms of the whole Young and Black campaign, I'm really glad that it's happened, because I've never really felt like I've been able to openly speak about my experiences, because there's never been a space where I felt I could speak about it. And I don't think that's healthy, because if you repress anything in life, it will manifest in different ways. So I think it's really important that people are made aware, or people are more aware of how it is being Black in Britain, but also what it's like being young, because I'm not just Black, I'm also female, so I'm already more disadvantaged, and also I'm young. So it's like three things I've got to contend with. But I think for me, the most important thing is that, like the previous panelist said, is that she was aware that there was no one that looked like her. So for me, when I'm working with children, it's really important for me that they see a young Black person is actually doing something in their life, and they can aspire to do something as well. So that's kind of like what my experience has been like.
Amazing. Sabrina, you raised a really important point, which was about not only are you young, Black and a female, so you're kind of being discriminated and facing barriers on three different levels. Tessie, I want to come to you because of the role that you're in. How have you found that your experience being a Black woman has differed? And how has that kind of been experienced in the world of work? How has your family kind of operated, and how has that changed like the older you've become, if it's changed at all?
Well, you know, I think it was Esther that said it earlier. It's really around, I've always seen, you know, I've always been brought up to work twice as hard. It's the narrative, I suppose, that's happened in every Black family. I have children who are in their 20s who kind of, you know, you've passed on that same ethics to them, you've passed on that same belief. And I think when you know that in some way, when you know that society has been built in a way that the odds are stacked against you, you build the resilience, you build a discipline that allows you to overcome it. And part of that discipline is being the best at anything that you do. It's being making sure that you, in some way, it's sad that you have to constantly prove yourself, but that's kind of the society that's been constructed, that people sometimes don't even know they're putting out. So I have, in some way, that's kind of how I've lived my life. I've lived my life in a way that I have to work twice as hard. I have to constantly push the boundaries. But also when I feel like someone said to me very early on in my career as chief exec of the Diana Award, you know, we always, at the Diana Award, we describe Princess Diana in some way as a disruptor, a positive disruptor.
Yeah.
Because when, if you think about what she did, even around AIDS and really busting the myths of what people believed then. Someone said to me many years ago, she goes, "Oh, whoa, Princess Diana must have crafted it in a way. Who would have thought that a Black lady is chief exec of a very royal brand? You know, she, in some way, that's another form of disrupting the system." And I always take that and I smile. And I smiled when she said that. But there is something about people not expecting you to be the person, and then you then saying, actually, let me challenge those thoughts. Why did you think that's not, you know, why did you think that? What's that stereotype? So I always use any kind of opposition in that sense as a way to educate, because sometimes people don't even know they have those stereotypes. They don't even realize they put it out. So for me, it's constantly using any opportunity to educate, and because that's the way forward. That's constantly pushing those boundaries. And when you realize, actually, I've got a platform and I want to create change, then you just make it happen. You seek any opportunity that makes it happen.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tessie. Famuda, I want to come to you because of the world in which you work in the media. How do you think kind of Black women are portrayed in the media, and how have you found it working in that industry? Have you been treated differently at all? Have you found that sometimes the stories that you want to push, you're almost having to explain why they're important? What's your experience been?
I think more than anything, especially in the last couple of weeks, I have found like the value and, like, you know, the missing voice that exists in a lot of newsrooms because there isn't any diversity. Like, you know, I work in a social media role, so most of the time I'm not really the go-to writer for a lot of things. There are a lot of people who are above me as writers. but I have found myself having to do or contribute to a lot more writing just because there aren't that many voices in the newsroom. And I know, like, you know, my sports desk have been really, really helpful and very supportive of me pushing any idea forward, because I think that's also the thing is, it's not so much just about the Black voices, it's also about the allies around who understand that they might not actually understand what's going on, but they should also give you the platform to, you know, to voice those opinions. So although at the minute, you know, my role has kind of gone from like a whole media role to more editing and, you know, providing content like this, I guess in that stance has been quite helpful. But I do know that my journey into sports came from the fact that I was in youth work and I really enjoyed it, but I've always had a passion for sports and I wanted to transition into that. But I knew I was coming from a very untraditional role. So, like, you know, a lot of the journalists I'd met had, you know, from as young as they can remember, they were writing, and that wasn't necessarily me. I don't have a degree in, you know, broadcast, anything like that. So from the get-go, I did have, like everyone else say, I was told you'd have to work really hard to kind of make yourself known. But I also think it's about, you know, the circle that you're around, and I was fortunate enough to have a really good circle within media. But I'm also aware of the fact that when there aren't that many voices, you do feel this burden of the fact that I need to be that voice for a lot of people, because there aren't a lot of people that look like me, you know, if something does happen. And then sometimes you do feel guilty in some sense when you do miss a couple of things, you know, when you're the only pair of Black eyes looking for a Black story, sometimes you do miss a couple and you do feel a sense of guilt. But that's what I do think is above that is very important to have those people in those newsrooms. So I do encourage anyone that's interested just to go and make it so possible for them.
Amazing, thank you. And Ndidi, I'm coming to you because I think we can all accept that everything that's been going on at the moment has affected pretty much everyone, everywhere around the world. However, for some reason, young people's perceptions on this topic seems to be kind of pushed under the carpet. And there's a clear disparity between actually young people being on the front lines and the voices of young people actually being in this conversation. In the role that you do and kind of the conversations that you've been in the last couple of weeks, what do you think that young people are struggling with the most when it comes to racial inequality in the UK?
Oh my goodness. I honestly think Sabrina said it best at the very beginning. The overwhelming thing that came back for when all of this kind of really, you know, kind of exploded was this sense of a lack of a space to talk, a lack of a space to share, and this question of like, where do I talk? Where do I express myself? Where do I go? Who is listening? Who cares to listen right now? And I think that there's something quite that was probably the most devastating thing to me at that point, because it did just bring to light that there are lots of you know, especially young Black and people who are, you know, walking around with so many of these questions, so many of these pressures. And I think Tessie is 100% right. We do have certain conversations in homes, but it's funny that it doesn't seem like it's that socially acceptable to have these conversations. And so, especially between races. And so for me, again, the campaign, Young and Black, was definitely about amplifying the voices of young Black people. But I was asked, and I've been asked repeatedly around this notion of, yes, but it's young Black people talking to themselves. So, you know, does that really push things forward? And this assumption that the moment that a Black story is captured, it immediately must be just for other Black people, as opposed to something that any and everyone should feel like they are able to engage in and learn in. And so I think even that notion of not only as a young Black person asking, do I have anywhere to talk? Does anybody care? But it's also, is anyone listening? Is anyone actually going to take on board what I have to say? And so for me, that's when Tessie talks about what can we do to progress change, that is the most significant difference I've seen in what's happening now. There seems to be a conversation that isn't just the Black community talking to itself. It isn't the kind of calling and screaming in the wind that I think has been happening. There does seem to be at least a real effort to have a multiple way dialogue. And I think that's incredibly positive.
I think just to add to that as well, I think one of the things that, like Ndidi said, you know, there are conversations that have always happened in Black families. And I think for the first time, people that are not in Black families are realizing that we're having these conversations. For example, I shouldn't have to teach my son how to prepare for stop and search. It's not fair that I'm teaching him, whereas in a white family, you don't have to worry about that. And I think just being able to capture and share that story certainly allows people to have an insight into that. And there's something magical about sharing. This is what we do at the Dano. We share stories, because when you talk about stories, that's how you create change. And I think hopefully this is not an echo chamber kind of conversation. This is people listening in to the stories, to the real life experience that we have to go through. And the power that young people have is saying, we want to change this narrative. We want something different. And that, for me, that's hope. That gives me a lot of hope that young people today are saying, not anymore. Young people of all races are saying, we want change. I don't want to have to hear my 17-year-old friend being held up by the police unnecessarily. I want a better future. And hopefully that's what we're going to get.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a slightly different question. As a young person myself, and as someone who's quite vocal on social media on this issue, I did actually want to ask everyone, what about the young people who don't have a kind of channel of how to express how they're currently feeling? What advice can you give to a young person out there that maybe isn't as confident to speak out on social media? How can they still get involved in a campaign like Young and Black? How do they find safe spaces where they can share it? Because ultimately, as a Black person, it's not your responsibility to constantly educate those around you on your experiences. Everyone asks us, actually, what have you done to process the news? And unfortunately, as a young Black person in the UK, I haven't had time to process the news, because everywhere I look, Black and non-Black people are talking about this issue. So I can't really escape. So what advice can you give to young people out there who are looking for ways to get involved, maybe not as confident, but can find other ways to get involved rather than just social media?
I think it's such a good question, Meg. And I think you've said a couple of things there that just, break my heart, but also I really recognize, where that's coming from. I think the first thing I would say is one of the things we're seeing with the campaign is that initially I think there were lots of videos being done with people sharing their story, which is great, but it's definitely some young people that are going to be comfortable with that and others aren't. And then, now we're seeing songs coming through, we're seeing written words that people may either record audio over or just write and send an image of something they've written. We're seeing artwork, we're seeing photographs. So again, it's whatever your chosen expression is. I think that's the beauty of social media. Also, people are sending things directly to us as opposed to posting it on their platform. So again, it's a way of speaking, but without necessarily putting yourself front and center. And in terms of the responsibility part, again, for me, the vision of this campaign was that really it's about giving people the opportunity to have a forum to share, and then it's our responsibility as a campaign to do something more with it. It's not the individual's responsibility to do more with it. That being said, and I know this isn't what you meant, but there is something here about this issue of responsibility. And it's something that I've had lots of conversations with lots of young people over the last couple of weeks, especially. I don't think this is about, it's our accountability to tell non-Black people, help them and educate them and, you go do the work. All of that I think is fine. But there is a moment here. And I think that our accountability is, I don't think that this is the moment to be silent. I don't think that this is the moment to choose not to talk. And as exhausted as we all are, as overwhelmed as we all are, this is the moment to collectively find whatever source of energy from wherever to speak. Because I've never seen an amplification that's happening as now. And the saddest thing is, let's be clear, we will all move on. The media is going to move on. The tension is going to move on. So what can we do in this moment to capture as much of the real everyday experience so that no one can ever say, I didn't know, I didn't hear, I never knew that. That's the moment we're trying to create.
Amazing.
Can I just add to that, Meg?
Yeah, go for it.
Absolutely.
I think just all the points that you've raised are really key, and I think it's important to acknowledge that communication comes in so many different ways. So it's, if they haven't got a voice where they're able to sort of speak to someone, then as you said, being creative in regards to writing it down or acting it out or singing it, whatever it is their way to do it. But I think it has to include what they're actually saying as well and how that's being translated. And I used the example recently of Marcus Rashford. He wrote a beautiful letter that was talking about free school meals and the impact that it will have on low-income families, and they said no. But then the following day, he done a video, news report, having exactly the same content, nothing's changed, the needs are exactly the same, yet they changed their decision. So it's about, do they have to physically see it, similar to the George Floyd stuff, for them to believe it? Or can we just still share our stories, and is that good enough? So it's important about that dialogue and how are they accepting that information? Does it have to be in a certain format? Do we need to make more platforms more accountable to say, this is the information, and no matter how it's presented, this is the fact of how people are thinking and how people are feeling? And just kind of thinking about young people, a lot of the time I've heard a few times in this conversation talking about how we're disadvantaged. Well, if we're saying someone's disadvantaged, then how can me personally have a real high expectation of someone if I'm already saying you're disadvantaged? So I try to use like the term underestimated in a positive way. So they underestimate you. You're not disadvantaged, you're underestimated, and this is what you're going to achieve, rather than you're disadvantaged, because almost you're saying this is a negative, you're already behind. When actually, we know how great you are, we know the powers that you have, we know the potential where you can get to, and skin color has absolutely nothing to do with that. So it's about how do we empower them and give them the tools, as well as them sharing how they're feeling, in order that we're all progressing in a forward direction.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Arthur. I think you raised a really important point, which is like, what can we begin to do to move forwards? One thing you mentioned right there is language, changing the way we speak about being young and Black and how we speak about this community is one step. A lot of teachers and a lot of people who work in organizations that have a lot of young Black people in are starting to ask, what more can they do? So I just wanted to ask the panel, what do you think older members of society, Black and non-Black, can do to support young people in the UK, particularly around racial inequality, and what can they do in their spaces within schools, local communities and youth organisations to promote greater conversations around this?
And can I just bring in Megan's, we've got a question from Megan here that says, I am white and work with lots of Black children and young people. I want to make sure I'm empowering them and encouraging them to be who they are. Is there anything in my language or any common things that I might miss as a white person that I need to think about when empowering my young people to become the people they want to be?
I would say, like, I work in a school environment, so I'd say the main thing is, in terms of empowering them, don't lead the conversation to a place as to where you want to go. Let the young person lead it. So ask them, what do you want to be? How do you think you're going to get there? And say, for instance, say something which you think is completely ridiculous, is not obtainable. That's not necessarily for you to judge. You should encourage them to let them know that they can be what they want to be, because a common thing is that I've experienced when I've been at school personally, not as part of my organisation, but when I was at school, that there were certain careers I was told, oh, you can't achieve that. People like you don't normally go into that career. But as a teacher, you're meant to be empowering your students. It's not acceptable to be saying those kind of things. And a lot of young people nowadays, they do suffer with low self-esteem. They do struggle with the academic side of school. So I think it's important as a teacher, just be careful with your language and think of, if you had a child, how would you want a teacher to speak to them? And that's how you should speak to your students. I think in terms of your language, I wouldn't say there's anything specifically, just be caring and just show that you're interested, and just be aware that even if you think there's certain things which you don't think they can achieve, that's not necessarily for you to judge, because at the end of the day, everyone has potential to achieve something. They just need to put in the work. But I think, oh, sorry, carry on.
I just wanted to add to that, there was a brilliant point, Sabrina. I just wanted to say that sometimes it might not be directly through Meg. She might be the link that has to signpost to someone who's more cultural appropriate for that person to then open up and take that conversation forward. So don't always think that actually it stops with you and what it is that you're actually saying. Actually, you could be the person that allows them for their light to be shone through them just being comfortable with somebody else in a different space. And I think it's important to listen. I think if the one thing advice I'd say is we have to listen and actively listen, not just listen to respond, listen to say,
what is the solution, or what is the action point we're going to take from this amount of information or this conversation that we've had. So with that teacher, it might be someone saying that they need somebody else to speak to, or they need access to a certain, I don't know, resource, and it's about how can you support them in order to achieve that. So it might not be you directly having that impact, but it's how can you then link that person or that young person to that next thing that helps them to continue that journey. So yeah, listening and active listening is key for me.
Absolutely.
Just from
So
that
I'm going to
point,
just...
sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it.
No, I was going to say, just on that point about things that can be done, I think one of the biggest things that I've realized is don't underestimate the power of like young people in that. I think that you guys might have seen this, but there's a picture going viral of a young girl holding up a massive banner that says like, why is my race a debate? And it went all over the world, like the likes of David Beckham, Lewis Hamilton, Martin Luther King Jr. all retweeted it, not knowing it's like a 21-year-old England under 21-year-old hockey player from the UK. Just like does it, and it, at that point she realized the power of like her influence as being, you know, a black girl in a very predominantly white sport, and whose photo had gone all over the world, and didn't realize that in some kind of way they were actually voicing some of the concerns that she had, being one of the only black players in that kind of sport. So in that sense, I would say don't really underestimate the value that you might have, and it might not necessarily come in the way of you saying something. And following on from that, I think one of the biggest things that have come out from this is the history of black people in this country is not that well known. And I think from a learning point, whether it's in your youth centres or if you're a leader, if you want to go out, is learn the history of black people in the UK and teach them, because I think one of the points that, again, sorry, my references are all sports because that's like the only thing I know of, but one of a footballer that I recently, my colleague spoke to, said that why is the history of black people only known through oppression? Like, why is it we only know what black people have gone through because it's been associated with pain or with hunger or with slavery? And of course, those are really important things to know, but equally, black people have achieved a lot of incredible things in this country and, you know, in other countries all over the world. Like, you know, so she was like, we should make those kind of things more visible. So I would say, if you're an educator or someone that, you know, you've got a responsibility over other young black people, teach them about people they can relate to, because one thing that we can all say here as women, and as, you know, and regardless of what our backgrounds are, women support each other because they help, you know, being able to see another woman in the workforce is encouraging. And, you know, so sometimes, so as a young black person, being able to see another black person succeed is encouraging. So sometimes we need those positive voices around us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I guess this is a really good time to ask, moving forwards, and especially when all of the buzz and the kind of passion is gone, and like Ndidi says, like when people slowly start to forget and where the real building will happen, what do you think the role of young people can be to co-create the future, whether it's to influence curriculums or whether it is to actually teach their teachers? What do you think young black people can do in the UK to co-create and be involved in this process of change, and not just be kind of a photo opportunity for people to be like, yeah, we're speaking to them? Like, how can they really be involved in this change?
I'm going to jump in, because one of the things that we've had the privilege of achieving in this country is, so one of the programs we tackle is bullying. We run an anti-bullying program, and for many years, for about 11 years now, we encouraged every school to have a team of young people who are called anti-bullying ambassadors, whose primary role is to ensure that bullying does not happen in their schools. Now, if I project and replicate that same formula and say to every single school should have I'm talking about education now. Every school across the country should bring young people together to begin to address racism and race in their school, to ensure that A, education happens, B, people understand the contribution of black people to the country, but also that racism becomes a thing of the past in their school. And it's so simple. It's such a simple formula, but it's about saying young people have the ability to create that change. Why don't every school make it a point of almost take it up and say, look, I pledge to bring a group of young people together who will be our youth voice in this school, who would help us as a school rewrite the contract of society. If every school did that across this country, every single school, primary and secondary, That's fundamental change. That's almost having that bottom-up change, because now young people will begin to, even from primary age, you begin to know that actually we're the same. We there's no difference between us. It's just a pigmentation of our skin. Now, if we move away from that, what about in the workplace? How do we ensure that we have the same kind of group? We have active young people or in the workplace who are helping change that culture. It's possible. We've done that with different things across society, and it's about, let's not even try and make this sound like a massive an impossibility, because if we actively commit to being proactive in our schools, in our workplaces, change will happen. Change is possible to happen.
Amazing.
Brilliant. Let me bring in some more of the amazing questions that are coming out. So thank you everyone so much for engaging. Please do. We definitely especially want to hear from the young people who are listening and engaged in the webinar right now. So obviously I can't tell if you're a young person just from your question, but I'm going to pick questions anyway. But please do feel free to share some questions for us. So I think one of the ones that, just to pick up here, is from Nicole, who is probably speaking on behalf of so many people at this point. And she says, I relate to that feeling of being overwhelmed. Do you have any advice for managing this feeling of being overwhelmed and exhausted, so that I can continue having these conversations with those around me? I wonder if any of the panelists, maybe Eartha, I'll start with you. Just first of all, do you relate with the sense of being overwhelmed right now? And then how are you personally managing yourself through those emotions?
Definitely can share that sentiment of feeling overwhelmed. But I think what I'd say is it's okay not to be okay. I think that first and foremost is important. And what I try and tell myself is, it is what it is. So whatever I can do and whatever I can manage in that day has to be good enough for me. And there's nothing I can do to change it. So I try and keep that mindset to say, this is what, if I've managed to work for 3 hours today, or read some literature, half of it rather than all of the full, paper, that's all that I've managed to do today, and tomorrow is going to be another day. I think it's really important that we don't burn ourselves out, because what we need to remember, whether it's a job or an interest that we're in, everyone is replaceable. So don't burn yourself out, and just know that what you've done and your efforts is enough, especially during a time like now in a pandemic, which there is no blueprint to how you should be feeling. No one knows what we should be doing. And sometimes we think we need to be doing more, and we're scared of not doing enough. But just know that your efforts is enough, and then tomorrow will come. Hopefully it's sunny and not raining, but yeah.
I love that so much. And I'm going to ask another question, and Meg, I'm going to ask it to you in a moment, so just get ready, because I'd love to hear your insights as well. But Eartha, you've just said something that I think really hit me, because I know it's something I struggle with, and I know that lots of my friends and family, this idea of it's okay to not be okay. I feel like for a lot of, well, for me, let me speak for me, but I definitely grew up, I don't feel like it's okay to not be okay. And I have to work to remind myself that. And I think it's because of this sense that you aren't just you. You represent all the people that look like you who aren't in the rooms you're in. And so you don't have the luxury of crumbling. You don't have the luxury of showing pain. And a few weeks back, I remember I wrote something on LinkedIn. I was so just frustrated, but I'm tired of having to regulate my pain depending on the audience I'm in front of. I'm tired of putting on different fronts, because I know this forum doesn't allow me to show up in the way that I need to show up. So I need to be this particular person here, and then I can be that person over there. And it adds to that exhaustion, I think, that Nicole's talking about, because you have so many different things you have to be conscious of. Because from the first moment I stepped into leadership, I was acutely aware of the fact that I wasn't just a Black lady on my own. I represented all Black women. And so whatever I'd failed or didn't, I would somehow fail my race, as it were. And so I think there is something so powerful about the simplicity of what you've just said. And the more we can amplify that, I think is really important. It is okay to not be okay. If it's not okay to not be okay now, I don't know when it ever will be. So I think I love that.
I think just to add to that, it's a what you need to understand, it's a continuous battle. It doesn't, I'm just not okay not to be okay one day and that's it, I've got it over.
Remind yourself all the
time. It's a constant kind of reflection, improving. Some days it gets the most of you, some days it doesn't, but it's about how do you learn to manage that. Because I think that's really important, that you're able to, you recognize the signs of when it's becoming too much, and that comes with over time experience where you're currently having that challenge to say it's okay to close the laptop, and no, I'm not bringing it on holiday that I've just spent money to actually take time and rest, and then I'm sending emails on the beach and my laptop's overheating, which still happens. But
sounds like a real life experience.
That's a real life experience, which literally just happened. But again, and it's about having those different hats. And you mentioned, like, for me, it's like when I'm at football, it's a different environment, and as an assistant head teacher, I've got leadership and we're leading 1,600 kids in a school. Then I'm a trustee of a youth club, and all of a sudden we're kicking it and we're listening to drill, and then I'm a counsellor and we're talking about dog poo and lights being on, and it's about how do I I feel like I'm just constantly moving in that sense, but it's just to know that this is how you're growing and how you're adapting as an individual, and this is the greatness that you have in yourself, that you're able to do that. So use that as a positive, but also recognize there's times when you need to stop, and don't feel bad about it.
That's word, thank you. Okay, I've got a question from Robert that I'm going to ask Meg, and then Tessie, maybe you can give some insight on this as well. So Robert says, I work as a support worker with vulnerable young people. One of them is a Black 17-year-old who's stopped every week under stop and search. He's always found with either nothing, I think that is, or just a little amount of weed for personal use. I love that. My advice to him, just a little amount of weed. My advice to him was to try to change environment when he's out, and to understand that it depends on the kind of friends he meets. So he might need to build better friendships. But I'm aware that in most of the cases, it doesn't concern any of that. And what he's experiencing is just racial discrimination. What would you suggest is better advice for these cases? Meg, hardest one to you so far.
To be fair, I'm happy about this because I've been in a situation, I think it was last year when I was working with a client. So I was based in Stratford, and Stratford is very, very known for a lot of Black boys to be stopped by police. Granted, there was a lot of kind of stabbing incidences that were happening last year in the summer, so there was granted that a lot of people were being stopped and searched. But a lot of young Black men out there at the moment don't actually know what their rights are. So instead of actually saying that you must like change your environment, as a Black person, when you go out there, you can't change your environment, because ultimately you're Black and you're a man. Regardless of whether you're in a nice suit or a hoodie, that doesn't actually change who you are as a person. That's the first thing people see. And I think it's really can slightly be quite insensitive for a young Black boy to tell him simply change your environment. In London, that doesn't really happen. And unfortunately, it's not the responsibility of the 17-year-old to change his life to suit a police officer. It's actually the police officer to educate himself on, why am I stopping this young boy in comparison to someone else? Why am I using this young Black boy as a search target? It's descriptive. It's nothing to do with maybe I saw him do something. It's just, this is someone who I look like should stop, so I'm going to stop them. And it's kind of a balance of power. And I think the biggest thing that you can empower young Black boys is explaining them what their rights are. You have a right to ask a police officer why they're stopping and searching you. And I saw this happen in Stratford. I saw a group of young Black men and young Asian men in a group. And in Stratford, they were stopped randomly. They didn't even understand why they were being stopped. And I saw it, so I intervened. So I asked the police officer, like, what's going on here? And I asked the young Black boys, do you know why you're currently being stopped? Have they asked your permission? Because to some extent, unless something changes, police have to ask you to be stopped and searched. So you have a right to actually say, no, I'm not comfortable being stopped and searched, and ask why. Lots of young Black people and lots of young adults in the UK don't actually realise that. And I think one aspect of that is actually teaching them. As a member of staff and a teacher and someone who works in the local community, it is your job to look after that young person, particularly when they're under the age of 18. That is not only preparing them for the future, but preparing them for the now. I think we talk so much about the future, but many young people's future is now, what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's about, as a person who's responsible for young people, learn these things and teach them how to keep themselves safe, because they're not always going to be with you. Another aspect of that is teaching them what can be right or wrong. Like, understandably, weed is going to be an issue while you would be stopped, right? That is like a non-given. Like, I'm not going to come here and say like, oh, maybe he's using it like for therapy, or like, no, realistically, that is something that's going to, so it's about educating that young person. Maybe they don't understand another way. Maybe they don't actually realize what their full potential is, or what else they could be doing with their time. So for you, it's about mentorship. I think no one really spoke about this, but I think there are two things that organizations at the moment can do really, really well, is mentorship. And one aspect about learning about this is reverse mentorship. As someone who works with young people, how can you learn more about young people through the young people that you work with? Ask them questions. This is how you become an active listener. Reverse mentoring, learn more from that young person, understand their stories, and that's what allows you to become compassionate and more empathetic, because you can now put you can put yourself in their shoes and begin to understand how you can help that person navigate through these spaces. So those are the two things I would mainly say, like education and mentoring.
Really good. There's a question on media coming up for Duma, which I'm going to come to you on. But Tessie, I love what Meg just said, because in a way that's almost talking from the justice perspective and talking about how the system should be and the rights. And I think that just, you know, even inspired me just thinking, actually, yeah, there should be more challenge. You've got teenagers, and I know that even from, like, I know what my conversation with teenagers, Black teenagers is, and it's usually airs on the just fix up. Like, it's just like, don't even give anyone any sign. Like, it's so interesting to hear Meg's perspective, because I think so many of our generation and our parents' generation err on the side of, that's not the moment to win. That's not the moment to struggle. You're not, you know. And so I just wonder, even from your personal experience, let alone the Diana Award, in that question that we got from Robert, what would you do? What are you saying to a 17-year-old that seems to repeatedly, weekly, find himself being stopped by the police?
I mean, I think Meg really gave great justice to that question, and even the issue of mentoring, which I was going to come on to later. But I think for me, there'll be two things. I was actually doing an interview a few days ago, and I was saying, look, most people love the police. Most people are comfortable knowing that the police are doing their job. But there's only so much a person can take before they crack, especially when when their biggest crime is the color of their skin. They can't not show up in that color. And therefore, there's only so much they can take before they break, before they go, look, what's the point? I'm going to get stopped anyway, so I might as well. This is not my advice. My advice would always be to that young person at that moment, you know, be polite, deal with what's going on, be literally, if you can, lower your tone, just be as polite as possible and explain and let the officer know. Hopefully, I still believe in human kindness. I still believe that there's a remnant who would always have good things in them, and when you can speak to them in a quiet and polite way, they would, you know, that situation would change. Do everything to de-escalate a situation. It's never helpful when a situation is escalated. Having said that, my hope now is that we are, by telling all these stories, we are building allyship. My advice to that youth worker, be an ally. Could you sit down with this 17-year-old and write a letter? Write a letter to that police station. Tell the police, look, this is my young person. Be an ally for that young person. Capture that story and share that back to the police and say, look, this is my young person. I know them. This, you know, it might not change it for that young person, but it might change how that police station or that area, how they operate. Because you're suddenly saying, can I bring these young people to talk to you about their experience? Wow. What we need, to me, what we need right now as a nation is allyship. We need to see something that's wrong. You need to see that a police officer is not dealing with the situation in the right way, and you need to be an ally. You need to step in and say, hey, let's de-escalate this right now. You need to notice that when this young Black person has walked into a shop and suddenly he's been followed, you need to walk up to that security officer and say, hey, I just noticed you're following this person. Is there anything wrong? This is we need change in this society. We need co-workers, we need volunteers from across the world. When you hear a slur, when you hear something that, do not wait for management to fix it. You be the change. You call it out. Call it, because racism thrives on that secrecy. It's so micro that sometimes you don't even know it, and the burden then becomes on the person who's at the receiving end to fix it. My challenge to everyone is, you be the ally. When you see it, call it out. Call it out, because many organizations, sorry, as I know I can see you trying, many organizations have great policies. The police would have a great policy about non-discrimination. Loads of organizations have great policies, but ultimately this is about human behavior.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna, I mean, God, there's so much, and there's so much we could say on this, I know I'm coming to you, but I'm conscious of time. We knew this time would go by so quickly. I want all the panelists just to get themselves ready for like their final 30 seconds. But there is a question that I'd love to get Faduma's insight into. So we've got Sydney, who's under 18. She said, or he or she says, the way in which young Black people are portrayed through the media is very frustrating as well as depressing. How do we combat this? Just from your experiences, how would you answer Sydney's question?
I think the simplest, and probably, I say the simplest, the most efficient way of like changing something like that is having more Black people within media. There's literally, like, I can't tell you the experiences that I've had within like coming through media and working at different platforms. And sometimes, you know, you see something, you know, like you'll see, like, you know, I think the most common thing is like Stormzy is often confused for someone else, and I'm just like, like, how do you guys not know who this person is? And then when you sit in the newsroom, you realize why they don't. When every person in that room is like, you know, older, middle-aged, white male, of course they've got no idea who, like, they can't differentiate between Rashford and Sterling. Sorry, those are the kind of things that happen in the newsroom. And I think that the best and the most efficient way is that you need more people from different ethnic minority backgrounds. You need more Black people in those newsrooms changing those things, and you need to hold people accountable when you see stuff. And I think that is the power of social media, is that people, when they do see something wrong, when they see an image confused, or when they see a storyline which is like, and it's something that's subliminal, you know, this headline might say one thing, but they use a picture which is like, that's got nothing to do with the story. You pull people up on those kind of things and you say, you know, this isn't on. And I understand that it's really frustrating, and as someone who is young and in media, it is, I know there's only so much power that I have within the platforms that I have, but one thing I have seen, which has been super positive, is the number of young Black people that have set up their own little platforms.
Exactly,
and it's so refreshing to see. You know, there's Golden Magazine, which is like all for women of color, and it's amazing. And there's, you know, there's Guys, there's like Versus, there's so many different platforms that young Black people have set up themselves, and they ask the questions. And, you know, now people don't go to other platforms for news. Like, some of the breaking news that we get in football come from this podcast called the Beautiful Games podcast, which is run by 3 young Black men who have like a laptop and one mic between them, and they build these relationships with footballers and brands that they now come to them to chat about stuff, and then that breaks in the wider news, and they've now earned that respect in this kind of media industry. And other, you know, media rooms are shaking. They're like, what the hell, how are we going to keep up with this? Absolutely. So I would say, more than anything, you've got that power to just honestly take on what you do. And it does seem like a really impossible mission, but trust me, like, once you're in the media circle, you realize it's a very small world and you can work your way around very quickly.
Brilliant. There's another question, Eartha, that I'd love to put to you actually in a moment. But Faduma, I think what you've just said is so important, but I also think it connects to what's happening in this moment. I would say to whoever just asked that question, I've lost your name now, but this is actually the moment to challenge media institutions and organizations and ask them, where are your Black stories? Where are your representations? Where's the diversity? Because again, there's never, in my experience, in my lifetime, there's never been this much amplification on this conversation. So I was exactly with you in terms of, let's just, you know, build your own platform, but I also don't want to lose the moment that let's not let anyone, you know, be excluded.
Yeah, definitely. Don't let things, you know, slide, and don't let things go, but definitely use, you know, amplify the voice you have. And this is a platform where a time where everyone is looking at something, so get behind stuff and make it happen.
Okay, 30 seconds, but there's so many good questions. I don't want to miss them, but this is great. Eartha, this is coming to you. This is from Jaden, and she says, or he says, as you are all Black and female, have you noticed that there's a pattern of how people treat you or act around you in the work environment? As I'm aware that not only do females get paid less, but Black people are, I just see the smiles on everyone's faces. Black people are also seen as subhuman. Jesus.
This is a question I actually wanted to ask as well, Ndidi, because for those of you who don't know, there was a recent kind of story that broke about Misha B's experience on X Factor. And I thought this was really, really important, because I just wanted to ask the panel, as being Black women, we've all been in a position where someone has said we are either overconfident, powerful, aggressive, talk too much, or overbearing? Just a quick show of hands, how many of us have heard that? Yeah, which is literally 100%. And I wanted to ask, as Black women, like, how do we own this narrative? Like, how can we kind of question and, I guess, challenge some of these representations of ourselves? Like, how do we do that without then falling into that stereotype of us being aggressive?
I think I was going to say, I think for me, when I've experienced those kind of situations, I always think it's not actually me, it's them. So if I'm speaking like this and saying, oh, you're being aggressive, well, no, that's just my voice. So I think for me, I always believe, like, a lot of this in scenarios is projection. People may see me as a threat because in the workplace, maybe there aren't a lot of Black people. So like, oh, why is she here? How did she get here? She doesn't deserve to be here. So I think it's about having confidence in yourself and knowing who you are. And people don't like it when you've got confidence. People don't like it if you say, well, actually, no, I've worked hard to get here. But that's not my problem. That's how I view it, because I've worked hard, and if someone's worked hard to achieve something, they deserve to be there. And if someone's threatened by that, that's to do with them, not to do with me. So I think if someone is saying to you, oh, you're being aggressive, or, you know, you talk too much, and I read the Misha B thing, I think it's just about knowing yourself and not letting those comments affect you, but also challenging them. So if they're saying, oh, you're too confident, well, why is confidence a bad thing? If they're saying you talk too much, but why is, like, question them. And I think take back the power from them. Don't let them affect your mindset. Don't let them change who you are, because a lot of those comments, it will affect you negatively, and then maybe you'll become more quiet, maybe you'll be less confident. And I don't think you should ever let that be the case, because I think we all need to empower who we are and not let society and not let people who do have these mindsets and views change who we are as people, because we're good people.
Can I just say,
Sorry, just for that, oh, go on.
I was going to say, it's a good point that you raised, Sabrina, just in regards to challenging them. But if we relate it back to Rob's question, where he was saying that his young person gets stopped too many times, why are we saying to, like, submit ourselves and not challenge them? Yes, there's ways in order to respond and challenge them, but I think it's important that we use the systems that are already in place. So if you are keep getting stopped, can we get those tickets? Can we go and report that harassment at the police station, so then it could be addressed? Because then when they have their team briefings, they might say, this is a kid who we keep stopping, we can't stop them. So when they do see them and they're driving past, they don't jump out, because they're like, oh, it's not worth it. He's going to come and report us, or it's going to go back to the sergeant. So we have to use the systems that are already in place to ensure that they are doing their right things and they are competent in the jobs that they're doing. Remember, these are young people who are learning, who are growing, who are maturing, whereas the police are adults who have been trained to deliver a certain job. So I think that's really important, that we don't put too much onus on the young person, and we actually say that as adults, you should be educated in a way to be able to deal with a certain situation. And then if it's not happening, there are systems that we utilize, such as going back to report that to the station. Yes, we know it's long to get the paperwork and you're busy, but if you want this to stop, this is the solution. You have to report the incompetence in order for it to stop. So yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that very quickly. I think one of the things that we've discussed is, and we briefly mentioned it, is mentorship and having mentors. I can't like stress the importance of putting yourself in a circle with people, because I know, like, you know, when you are the only Black person in a workspace or the person of color, it sometimes is a lot to take in, and not just the workspace. Sometimes it's as young as college and, you know, university. My first exposure to feeling like a minority wasn't actually in school and college. My school was very, very diverse. It was only when I went to university I realized, oh, okay, there aren't that many people that look like me, and that was my learning curve. So the only thing I can say is really have a strong network of people around you. Like, media has a reputation for being very not diverse, and it isn't. But I can't tell you the amount of people that I have around me, and that's because I've signed up to programs which are all dedicated to helping young Black people or young people of color to succeed within that field. So I work with, you know, the likes of BComs and Kick It Out, which is all for young people. And I can't tell you how helpful those circles are, because if I have a concern, I raise it with them and we support each other in whatever way we can. So mentorship is an important thing, and sometimes the mentorship doesn't have to be another Black person as well. If you feel like there's another ally in the workplace that can help you, you know, let them take you under their wings, and, you know, they can help you, and you can open that space for someone else. Because I think more importantly, what needs to happen is that we need to make sure we aren't the only other people in that room. Like, you know, we don't want to have this discussion in a year's time again, and it just being us as panelists and us having the same amount of people coming back. We want it to be more and more people come back. So, you know, you want to keep passing that ladder down for more people to join you as time goes on.
So I'm very, very clear that we could talk for another hour, and apparently it feels like people wouldn't mind that. But just to kind of honour people's time, I'm going to try and wrap us up, but I would love, I think it was one of the questions as well, for everyone to share. It was going to be 30 seconds, it's now 15 seconds, of really the purpose of these conversations are about reimagining the future. So really thinking about, and actually Faduma, you've probably just touched on a little bit, but what do you imagine could be different? And it is connecting it to COVID-19. So there is something about this moment. There is something about the amplification of what's happening now. How would you reimagine what the future looks like around race relationships, social cohesion, inequality, whatever that might be? Is there a tangible thing that you focus on to say, God, I just imagine that because of where we are now, that could actually be really different? I wonder if people could just share really quick reflections on that. And Tessie, I'm gonna start with you and work round, but please share.
I suppose if I want to reimagine the future, I want to imagine a future where we are all actively anti-racist, where racism is even allowed to thrive, because everyone's so on the ball, everyone can identify even that microaggression, and the minute it happens, people call it out, and that's it. That's, to me, the future. In a year's time, that's kind of where I want to see us. So it's not even, it doesn't, you know, if you're racist still, then you're like, everyone's like, you joking? That's kind of the future that I imagine.
Amazing. Sabrina?
I would say for me, the ideal situation would be that a Black person isn't getting disproportionately stopped and searched. A Black person doesn't go to a job interview and think, oh, because I'm Black, am I less likely to get this job? So it's where you can just feel comfortable in yourself, and you being Black isn't an issue. You're viewed as everyone else in society.
Lovely. Faduma?
I would say probably more than anything is that we, again, like the importance of holding people accountable for just being silent. I think silence is the biggest enabler of racism, especially in the workforce, especially in schools and colleges. You know, the fact that young people get excluded for haircuts is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And that's something that I remember people happening, you know, when I was in school, and it still carries on. But we need people to actually, as an effort, go up and stand there. I think the whole situation with Marcus Rashford showed that when people kind of speak as a collective, their voices are a lot more louder. So hold people accountable for being silent, but also making sure they support the correct movement.
Amazing. Thank you. Eartha?
I think I can't look to the future. I think as we look back 50 years ago, we're still doing the same things that we're doing now. So for me, it's about action. What are we going to do now that's going to have an impact? Because if we change it now, that means in the future it's going to be changed. And then in the future, we're thinking about how can I be my greatest self? So,
and what's the one thing you'd focus on in terms of now?
Don't tell me, show me, whatever that is, whatever that relates to you now, whatever problem you have or whatever barrier you want to overcome, what are you productively doing to overcome that? So for everyone, that's going to mean something different.
Nice. Okay, Meg?
Absolutely, just want to echo what Eartha said again. But for me, it's more about seeing a world where education can be used as a tool to promote that change. I genuinely believe if the UK curriculum was transformed, we can all transform that narrative. So that way it starts the younger generation who will grow into very well-informed society that doesn't actually see race the way our ancestors and our older generations did. So education, massively. I want to see schools, colleges, universities completely transform the narrative by bringing more stories about the real history around Black people, not just a colonial kind of viewpoint from it.
Brilliant.
So indeed, last thing to add to what Meg just said.
There's no adding.
Last thing.
Stop.
Education is not just at school. We're educated from the home, from the community, from all the different environments around us. And I think that's really important that we don't put all the onus on education being related to school and that building and what that establishment can give to us. It can happen in the home, it can happen in the community. We're educated in all our different interactions that we have. So education is life in general.
Okay, Eartha's taken my slot, so I'll hand over to close us down. Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. Over to you, Tessie, then Shanice.
Great. So I think it's, for me, the 5 things, I'm going to sum up everything we've said in 5 things. Firstly, we've talked about education. Education, let's focus for this slot on in schools. If every kid, every young person, child, adult is taught from a very young age that everybody is important, that we will have a better society. So firstly, education. Let's work on our curriculum. Let's change our curriculum. Secondly, conversations in the home. Let's have those diverse conversations in our homes. Let's educate. Let's amplify what the schools are teaching us. That's critical. The third bit is our groups. Who's around our table, even in our homes? Who's in your circle of friendship? Is your circle diverse? And this challenge goes to all of us. Is your circle diverse enough, or is your circle simply people like you? Just open up those circles so that we are constantly educating ourselves. Fourth is mentoring. You know, I think this is something that every organization should be committing to doing. Mentoring, the way to level up, the way to bridge inequality is that we take people under our wings. Let's offer mentorship. Let's make up for the past years, and let's just support young people, particularly young people, to thrive in the workplace. So for me, those are my real takeaways. The sum of everything we're saying today is that we can rewrite the contracts of our society. We certainly can, and it's not that hard to do. We just all need to be on the same page to make that happen.
Thank you so much. I think Tessie's just done my bit of rounding up with those 5 excellent points, so thank you so much. I'll just quickly wrap up with some logistical things. So if any young person would like to get in contact for any support, the Diana Award have a crisis messaging service. So you can text DA to 85258. And that's 24/7 free support across the UK. So any young person who would like support following this conversation, please contact that number. And I just want to say a huge thank you to our panelists. I feel like we could go on for hours and hours with this conversation. It's been some real good key points picked out. And I think anyone who wants to continue this conversation, please get involved in the Young and Black campaign, #Young and Black. And include Diana Award, UK Youth, Jermaine Jackman, and My Life, My Say. Also, please look out for further of these events. We will be hosting many different things to continue this conversation, because I think what we don't want to happen is for this to stop once the media buzz goes away. So please get involved in all of the conversations across our platforms. And thank you so much. The recording will be up on our website in about a week's time if you want to re-watch and take down any key notes on things you and your organization could be doing. But just to say thank you so much again to everyone on the panel. It's been a really great conversation. So thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.